Love is a strong word. It's a great word, but it's a powerful word. You know when you first start dating someone and there's that tension? You want them to know how you feel, but you don't want to scare them off by coming on too strong? That's how I felt about the FiiO K17 when it first arrived. Actually, no, that's wrong. My first reaction was, I thought you'd be bigger. Having only seen marketing photos, I was expecting a full-sized hi-fi component. This isn't that. Instead, it's like somebody took a vintage hi-fi amplifier and put it in the dryer on a hot cycle. Everything shrunk and created a fun-size hi-fi component. I was okay with that though. I was still feeling the stirrings of a deep admiration for the K17, which is something that happens rarely given how many products come and go with me every month. Let me explain what was drawing me in so strongly. Firstly, at $899 US, the FiiO K17 does everything except amplify speakers. It's a streamer, it's a DAC, it's a headphone amp and a preamp. It looks great. You can customize the lighting or switch it off altogether. It's also got physical controls for all of the regular adjustments you're likely to make, like the output mode and the gain settings. Or then you can use the touchscreen for all the rest of the adjustments. Yes, that little display is a touchscreen. It works really well too, despite the compact size. Speaking of compact size, the FiiO K17, despite its compact size, is still capable of pumping 4 watts into a 32 ohm headphone via either of the balanced headphone outputs. There's 4.4mm and 4-pin XLR. That's way more than you're ever going to need for any headphone other than something like a Modhouse Tungsten. Even the Abyss 1266 and the original Susvara should be fine from the K17 unless you're using crazy amounts of EQ. But let's pause here for a moment before this becomes a shopping list of features and benefits that you can read about online. As I then began to actually use the K17, some of the shine wore off my original infatuation. For starters, I was sent the silver version. I think the K17 looks great in silver, so that wasn't a problem. On the black version, FiiO use a grey printing to label the gain selector dial and the output selector dial. It's high contrast and easy to read based on the images I've seen. On the silver version, they used grey again. And you know what silver and grey have in common? Just about everything. There's zero contrast unless you get just the right angle to reflect the light off the casework and make the silver brighter than the grey. Then you might have a chance of reading the labels, but it takes a bit of effort. That was a daft move by FiiO. Another questionable move by FiiO was limiting the streaming capabilities of the K17 to only Roon or AirPlay. There's no Tidal Connect, there's no Spotify Connect, there's not even DLNA connectivity for other apps like UPnP. Was this romance dead before it ever got a chance to blossom? Perhaps. And it seemed like a shame too. The K17 was using the AK4499 and AK4191 combination of DAC chips that I've loved in every other product I've tried them in. It also saw a departure by FiiO from the slightly lifeless THX amplification circuit they've used in more expensive devices like the K19 to a more traditional Class AB amplifier in the K17. I'd had high hopes. I also had some memories of being just a little bit disappointed by what should have been the very impressive K19 that I just mentioned. It's a unit that sits above the K17 in FiiO's range, and yet the K17 does more. I wondered if jamming more features into the K17 at a lower price point had resulted in something that was maybe less well thought through and not as good of a device. Well, I can forgive a poor choice of printing colour for the labels on the dials. That's something you're probably going to get to know and remember pretty quickly, and you're probably not going to be using it every single day from moment to moment. I also hadn't listened properly to the K17 at this point. Just some casual listening without my really focused attention while I was doing reviews of other products, like FiiO's own TT13 turntable. Well, thank Cupid that I plugged it in and took a proper listen. The sound and versatility offered by the K17 is nothing short of revelatory. FiiO are schooling the competition with this one. There are some other usage quirks that we'll come back to shortly, but let's just bask in the enjoyment of the K17 for a moment. This thing is brilliant. It sounds natural and engaging, and that's not really something I could say for other products like the K19 or what seems to be the predecessor for the K17, which is the K9 Pro ESS. That's in terms of the price and where it sits in FiiO's range and basically what it does. Both the K19 and the K9 Pro ESS were solid units. There was nothing wrong with them. That is, until you compared the sound they were producing with other devices from other manufacturers at a similar price point. FiiO's amplifier stages just lacked a bit of sense of dynamics and energy and engagement. It was a little bit muted and a little bit dull in comparison. For me, that always killed the engagement, and I found myself always wanting to listen to something else. At the same price, similar levels of technical performance, but just more enjoyable from those other brands. Well, not anymore. I've got the slightly more expensive and less featured xDuoo TA32 here at the moment for review. That one's coming up very soon, and so I figured I should compare the two. The TA32 is a bit unique because it allows you to swap different DACs into it, and it comes with a Roon brand DAC, but you can switch out things like AKM, ESS, or even a new Wolfson DAC card is coming soon, I believe. I'll talk about the TA32 in a lot more detail in my full review of that one, so subscribe if you want to see that. But with the stock included Roon DAC card, the TA32 can't hold a candle to the K17. The TA32's stock sound is flatter in the soundstage, and it's not as well focused in terms of imaging placement. It just feels less lifelike and less engaging. Remember though that you can swap the DAC card in the TA32, you can also change the tubes, and so it's not a completely one-sided battle, and it's one that I'll go into in more depth in the TA32 review. I'll compare it again to the K17, but with some of those upgrades made for the xDuoo unit. The conclusion I drew from this first round of comparisons though, is that the K17 is delivering exceptionally good sound for the price you're paying for it. Sonically, it's as good or better than any of the competition on the market around the price that I can think of or that I've tried. But what about its performance if we just isolate the DAC for a moment? A product that I know and also love is the Schiit Bifrost 2 DAC, specifically the current 2/64 version. It costs roughly the same as the K17, but it's a pure DAC. No streamer, no headphone amp, no preamp or volume control, but it sounds brilliant. Comparing the K17 and the Bifrost 2, both working as pure DACs feeding into the Burst & Soloist Voyager, revealed a few sonic differences between them. The Bifrost 2 is a little bit smoother sounding, and that's whether I was using the Audeze LCD5 headphones or the Adam Audio S2V active loudspeakers. On first listen, the K17 seemed to be perhaps even better than the Bifrost 2. It seemed a bit more detailed and resolving, but the Bifrost 2 is a little bit more three-dimensional. That means that backing sounds, the other instruments other than the main vocalist or soloist, are pushed back a little bit and the soundstage gets a bit rounder as a result. It serves to focus that central soloist or vocalist better, but it does mean that some of the details in the backing instrumentals are a little bit further away from you. They're still there, they're just not as obvious. Tonally, these are both very similar, but they have different presentations, with the K17 being a little bit livelier and more energetic, versus the Bifrost 2 being just a little bit smoother and a touch more easygoing. After much back and forth between them, I think both are amazing, and as much as I love the Bifrost 2, the K17 has it soundly beaten on features. Given that the sound quality from these two is comparable rather than one being better or worse, the K17 would be my easy choice for the money. I don't see why you'd spend the money on a Bifrost 2 now, when for the same money, you can get a DAC that's just as good, but you're also getting a streamer, preamp, headphone amp, and possibly more that I'm forgetting. But while we let that bombshell sink in, let's talk about a couple of other wrinkles in the K17's user interface. Or I should say user experience, because it's not just about the interface, it's about the internal operations of the K17. I've already mentioned that the K17 is Roon or AirPlay streaming only, which I think is a bit of a shame, but I also don't like the fact that the streamer circuit disappears when you switch to a different input. And what that means is that unlike other devices, say a Eversolo DMPA6, you can't just decide to stream to it from Roon whenever you want to and have it pick up and start playing that signal, because Roon or AirPlay won't even see that the K17 exists until you manually change the input over to the streaming input. And so if you're using it in 1 minute as a DAC, or maybe you're using local playback from an attached hard drive or network storage device, you have to manually go, choose streaming, and then go to Roon and start sending your music or AirPlay. And that for me is a slight drawback and a slight inconvenience. But I think this is designed as a device that sits on your desk with you, or maybe close at hand where you're going to be able to quickly and easily reach over and choose the input that you want to. And so as I said, it's a wrinkle rather than a major issue, but it's also true with the USB DAC mode. When you've got the K17 in its USB input mode, it works beautifully as a DAC. When you're using any other mode, that USB input is switched off. And so whatever device is feeding the K17, most likely it's going to be a computer, it's going to stop seeing that the K17 exists until you then switch it back into USB mode. That's probably not a big deal unless you're switching inputs regularly, which is something that I do all the time as a reviewer. But it does mean that if you want to switch between optical, coaxial and USB, there can be a little bit of a hassle because you've got to switch to USB, give your source device time to see the K17 and then start the playback again. You can't just leave it playing. And that was something that I needed to do when I wanted to test the differences, if there were any, between coaxial, optical and USB inputs. And my conclusion here was that the USB and the optical inputs sounded better than the coaxial, but I also found the same exact thing with the TA32 and the Bifrost too. So I suspect this was more about the cables that I was using coming from the Singer SU6 digital-to-digital converter, as opposed to the differences between the actual inputs on the K17. And so I would say use whichever input on the K17 you want to. They're probably comparable. It's going to depend more on your source device and the interconnect you use rather than the K17 itself. Interestingly, I also found that streaming to the K17 sounded a little bit different again from using the USB or the optical. And I found that I was preferring the sound via the Singer SU6 DDC out of the optical socket and going into the K17 and optical. That was my preference over and above the streaming circuit. That said, the differences were pretty minimal, and so I wouldn't get hung up about it. The other thing to take into account here is it's going to depend on the quality of the input source you're sending. So the SU6 gives a really nice clean output. If you're connecting up directly to a PC, you might find streaming sounds better. And with the ability to use UAC 1 mode, you could even connect the K17 to a gaming console, in which case the sound quality via the streamer is probably going to be best for music, and then save the console playback just for games. And so at this point, we have an insanely capable device that can go head to head with a pure DAC at about the same price point. And so does that mean that the K17 is also a better option than an equivalently priced stack of DAC and headphone amp at the same price? Let's find out. For nearly the same price as the K17, you can pick yourself up the SMSL RAW-DAC1 and the SMSL H400 headphone amp. That stack has nowhere near as many features as the K17. There's no streaming, no playback from a local hard drive or network storage device, and no high-powered EQ capabilities. I hadn't mentioned that about the K17 yet, had I? We'll come back to that one. The other thing the SMSL stack can't do is sound as good. It's very rare for an all-in-one unit to sound as good as an equivalently priced stack of separate devices, or at least it used to be. I've had a few examples of this come my way recently, and the K17 is the latest in that list. The K17 delivers a slightly smoother and richer sound than the comparatively cleaner or more clinical sounding SMSL stack. The K17 isn't lush, it just sounds a bit more natural than the SMSL stack. The H400 will deliver a little bit more sense of energy or emphasis on the pluck of a guitar string, whereas the K17 puts a little bit more of the emphasis on the resonance that comes after the pluck of a guitar string. I'm talking about subtleties here, so it's not as though they're vastly different sounds, but you definitely get a different feel from both amplifiers, or in this case both setups, and it depends on what you're looking for. One area that I think the K17 was demonstrably better to me was that it does deliver a better sense of three-dimensionality or depth and layering within the soundstage compared to the SMSL stack, and that for me is always going to give the win to the more three-dimensional sound. And then we should come back to the EQ function I teased a moment ago. With an extra USB-C connection on the back of the K17, it will also give you access to a very powerful DSP-based EQ function. It's the same uber powerful EQ and compression and limiter control that was on the much more expensive K19. Using an app on your computer is the only way to calibrate that EQ, but once you've calibrated and stored your EQ and compression settings from the application into the K17, you can then access it through the remote control or the touchscreen on the K17 without being connected to your computer. The computer app also lets you run real-time analysis of your system, and so you can make your adjustments on the fly and see what the results look like. That's too complex for me to go into detail about and show you here, but let me know in the comments if you'd like me to go into detail in a separate video. For now though, I think I've told you everything that I really can about the K17. Despite a few quirks and even a couple of flaws, I'm completely in love with it. I think this could be, for me, the product of the year and maybe even the decade. At least to this point in the decade. Its combination of features, performance, and price is just crazy. If you want an amazing DAC for under $1,000, this is actually a great option. If you want a DAC and a headphone amp for under $1,000, this is a great option. If you want a DAC and a preamp for a speaker setup under $1,000, yep, you know what I'm going to say. All of that's not even yet including the streaming and the DSP functions. They're all a bonus. And then there's the gorgeous design and interface. This also happens to be one of the very best units of its type that I've interacted with for as long as I can think of. And so even if it didn't have all of those benefits going, if we dropped one or two of them, the K17, assuming it kept the sound quality side of it, would still be a killer product. But it has all of those benefits too. So grab one of these using the links down below if you want one of the best audio products on the market right now for under $1,000. And if you want another bonus product to grab at the same time so that you can immediately enjoy some incredible tunes from the K17, check out this video next to see why I think the FiiO FT1 headphones are another example of FiiO being on an absolute hot streak right now. For now though, a huge thanks to YouTube channel members, also to channel Patreon members, and to those of you who leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.